Menachem. The 10th day in the month of Menachem of. And the parallel, what's the opposite of Yud Av? The opposite of Yud Av is Yud Shvat. Right? No, it lach nicht. Because the Chodshei HaCheref and the Chodshei HaKayetz, the summer and the winter, are parallel and aligned. There's a copy right there. There's a copy for you for the Maamar. And the Rebbe spoke in the Maamar of Yud Shvat, Basi Lagani, that Godol Silukan Chal Tzadikim Kichurben Beis HaMikdash. And a different girsa is Godol Silukan Chal Tzadikim Yesem Kichurben Beis HaMikdash. In the Maamar of Yud Shvat, Basi Lagani, the Rebbe connected Yud Shvat to Churben Beis HaMikdash, equal to Churben Beis HaMikdash, or greater than Churben Beis HaMikdash. So the parallel between Yud Av and Yud Shvat is very, very, very strong. And of course, you know that the reason the Avelos continues today until noon. The Avelos didn't end last night. The Avelos of Tisha B'Av ends 3/4 of the day of Yud, because that's when the Beis HaMikdash did most of its burning. The first Maamar that Rebbe ever said, Basi Lagani, saying that Maamar, he quoted the Gemara, the Medrash. Yeah, Godol Silukan Chal Tzadikim Kichurben Beis HaMikdash, one Medrash. Godol Silukan Chal Tzadikim Yosem Kichurben Beis HaMikdash. I did. You just weren't listening at that time. But anyways, it's a very strong connection between Yud Shvat and Yud Menachem. Because the 5th month represents Yechida, right? And the winter time it's Yechida, and the summertime it's Yechida. And that's why Menachem Av is the time of the Churban. Because like it says in the Midrashim that everybody knows and talks about, that Rebbe talks about so much, that the moment of the Churban was the maximum ahava between Yidden and the Eibishter, like the famous Medrash which is brought, that at the moment of the Churban they took out the Kruvim, and they were Mu'urin Zebezeh. The Kruvim, whatever Kruvim means, but Pashtus it means on the walls. They had images of Kruvim. Sometimes they faced each other. That meant that Hashem and Yidden were liking each other. Sometimes they had their backs to each other, which meant Kvayachal, the Yidden and the Eibishter were not so friendly. And at the moment of the Churban, they were embracing, hugging. And Titus HaRasha laughed and he said, your God is Maki. It says that in the Bnei Meir of Bnei Amin. The Eibishter is laughing at you. That the moment of the Churban, he's showing maximum love. I heard a tape that went around yesterday, 4 or 5 minutes, and I could send it to you if I could find it, where the Rebbe said that it says in Shara Kavonis, says in the Arizal, Sefer HaKavonis from Arizal, that at the Tisha B'Av in the afternoon, when you say Nachem, in the time and place and year of the Churban, Yidden will be Simcha Gedela. The Arizal says that the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Yidden will be Simcha Gedela. The afternoon. Because they realized that Shafach Eitzah, Apel Eitzah Malavodim, that the Eibush is destroying his house and not destroying them. So Chedesh Av, which is the time of Avelus, and if I'm of Tshuva, as we know, Avelus is Tshuva, like it says in Rambam, is actually a symptom of the unbelievable love that the Eibishter has for Yidden. Like the Gemara says, that the Eibishter does not allow the Jewish people to be lost. Finished. There's a bris, a covenant. He's not going to let the Jewish people be lost. And if in order to keep the covenant in Yidden and the Eibishter, he has to do things that are quite painful, he'll do them to keep Yidden. That's why it's called Av. A father, Menachem Av. Atate, that says in Tanya in Igeres HaKedesh, Av Rachamon, who slaps his son in the face. So the son doesn't run away, the son doesn't retaliate. He stands because he knows that if his father is giving him a patch, that patch is a symptom of maximum ahava. So there's a connection between Yud Shvat and Yud Av. So you have to also say that it's a connection to Mashiach. So first of all, they sent around another video that I saw that Kuti Rappel of Shalom told the Rebbe that his birthday is Tisha B'Av. So the Rebbe called him back and said, the Tisha B'Av is the Yom Haledes Mashiach. How do Hasidim understand it? Between Tisha B'Av and Yud Aleph Nisan is exactly 9 months. You'll see, between Tisha B'Av and Yud Aleph Nisan is 9 months. 9 months. So Tisha B'Av is the birthday of Mashiach. And Yud Shvat is certainly the birthday of Mashiach, because Yud Shvat is not only the day of the Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe, it's the day of the Aschos and the Siyas of the Rebbe. So the connection between Yud Shvat and Yud Av is not only in the idea of Churban and Siluk, but an idea of Noel Do Mashiach Shel Yisrael. That's the word. And in them kochas zechmir, right? We need the geula. And we need Mashiach. And I think we really need to want Mashiach. I think it's negeya. We have to want Mashiach. As der sein uns negeya. The Rebbe says Mashiach is going to come when we're maftzir, when we're teveya, when we demand, when we insist, when we want. And now we're going to Chamish Asar B'Av. So of course, you know what it says in Chassidus, in the Maimorim, that we always know the rule of Yerida Tzerech Aliyah. And the Aliyah is Lefiyerech the Yerida. If the Yerida is greater, the Aliyah that follows is also greater. And since Tisha B'Av is the maximum Yerida, so Chamish Asar B'Av, Kaim B'Siyira B'Shlamusa, of Chodesh Menachemov, is the maximum Aliyah. And that's why it says in the Mishnah that one of the happiest days of the year, because it's the time of Shidduchim, right? That's what the Mishnah speaks about. Whatever, B'nei Yerushalayim, Yetzes v'chelas Bakramim. There he says, Yidden and the Eibishter. The Eibishter just destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. 6 days later, the Kalas says to the Chosin, the Yidden says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Bachar, Sonai, Nechorei. Could you imagine that happening today? But in the times of the Mishnah, there was a much higher standard of Tznius. So he didn't need to have so many separations between a Chosin and a Kala to make a Shidduch. But it goes on Yidden and the Eibishter. That's how it's explained in Chassidus. And just to complete the thought, I want to mention that Rish Chedesh of is the Yom of Aran HaKein. I spoke about it the other day. That that's Inyan of Eyev Shalom, Veredev Shalom, Eyev Sabriyas Amakarvan Latera. And in addition, Rish Chedesh Shvat, the opposite of Rish Chedesh of is Rish Chedesh Shvat, is the beginning of Sefer Mishnah Torah. And the whole idea of Mishnah Torah is a Torah which comes from Golus, from Yidden, like Rish Chedesh Shvat. And Moshe Rabbeinu was Be'er Satera Azez Be'er Heitev. He was Metargem the Torah into 70 languages to be Mavara of the world. I think there's a very strong connection there as well. Now, it's Friday. And we have, Baruch Hashem, a full house. There's almost no seats available for anybody to sit in. So let's start the Maimed. I don't want to waste time. I plan on learning the entire Maimed today. The Maimed is 8 pages. But it's really not a difficult Maimed. And I want to start the Maimed with a Hagdamah. Everybody knows that one of the most important things in our life is Pirush Tefillah. I touch the words in davening. And on my website, intechassidus.org, I have a very extensive section, a relatively involved section, where I talk about Tefillah. With a lot of different kinds of classes. I don't want to advertise right now. We'll do the advertising for a different time. And one of the brachas of Shmoneh Esrei is the bracha of Hashiva Sheftenu Kavarishena V'Yatayach Kevatchila V'Hasa Yemena Yogam V'Anocha and then Zomleich Aleinu Atah D'Shem Levatcha B'Chesed V'Racham B'Tzedek V'Mishpat. Right? We say at Tefillah, Hashiva Sheftenu Kavarishena. Hashem should bring back our judges. And the Rebbe says judges means people who teach Torah. V'Yatayach Kevatchila means Nevi'im. Even though in the Pasuk it says Shoftim v'Shoitrim, policemen. In the Pasuk in Navi it says Yayatzayir. Because when Mashiach comes, we're going to be willing partners. We just need someone to explain to us the Divrei HaTorah. So the Pasuk says, Hashiva Sheftayach V'Resheni B'Tzedek V'Tchila. So we say in davening, Hashiva, you should return. Sheftayach V'Resheni B'Tchila. Then we say, V'Hasa Menu Yogam V'Anocha. Take away from us Yogam V'Anocha, anguish and sighing. What is the connection? No one ever told me. But I'll tell you what I think it means. I think this is an incredibly important lesson that's so connected to our generation, it's unbelievable. One of the human natures is that we hate to be told what to do. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Everybody likes to feel they can do whatever they want. Nobody wants to feel like somebody else can tell them what to do, especially if they don't even have to explain it. Nobody likes that. It's against our nature. Americans are the worst at this disease. Americans don't tolerate being told what to do at all. Right? It says in Hayem Yem, Ohuves Habikoides, love constructive criticism because it'll put you on a good path. Fact of life is, most people, Vania Kotten B'Seichem, don't like to be criticized. So when you have a judge, you have a Rov, you have a Yoyet, you have a Mashpia. So you need a Rov, you need a Mashpia, but you have a basic disdain, a basic negative feeling towards them because they take away your feeling of independence. What happens if Chas v'Shalom you don't have a Rov and you don't have a Mashpia? I can do whatever I want. So in the beginning it's hula kapts and everybody's enjoying their freedom. I can do whatever I want. And it leads to yoga and vanuch. When a person doesn't have leaders, when people don't have leaders, teachers, directors, rabbonim, mashpiyim, who take a stand, who take a position, who speak out, and they say, Azay dafmen zechfiden, this is what must be done. So at first, it feels very good, I'm hefker. And then you start to realize that everything falls apart. And of course, you see it in the weakest links. You see it in the children. You see it in the people on the fringe. And it goes from the fringe to the very, very center. And you start to realize that this idea that I don't need a Rav, I don't need a Mashpia. I'm a bigger Rav than my Rav. I'm a bigger Chassid than my Mashpia. And I'm smarter than both of them together. And you realize that it leads to Yom Vanuch. So Mashiach comes, we daven, give us leaders. Give us people who teach us what to do and even tell us what to do. Because that removes Yagam Vanuch. That's how you teach. That's how I interpret. That's how I think of this tefillah. And then you say something else. That you should be our king alone. Meaning to say, first you're mispalo for Sheftayach v'yatzayach. Mashiach is going to come. So you have to have a judge, you have to have a navi who tells you the words of the Torah and brings the words of the Torah closer to you. But in the end, you don't want to shave it, and you don't want to shait it, you don't want to yoy it. You want Ma'ata Hashem levadecha. The Eivish that himself is going to become our king. And that's how this tefillah goes. You start off by saying that in the beginning of the Tkuf of Mashiach, you have to have Sheftayach and Yetzayach, which takes away Yogin Vanocha. And then you continue with the Malayach Aleinu Atah Hashem levadecha, the Eivish himself becomes our king. Now the problem is, after it says the words, it says, Bechesed, Uberachamim, Betzedek, Ubemishpat. Chesed, Racham, Tzedek, Umishpat is not levadecha. That Hashem is going to be our melech with the help of Chesed, Racham, Tzedek, and Mishpat is the opposite of levadecha. And of course, the teres in this kasha is, if we get from the Eibishter, through his midas, through Chesed, Racham, and Tzedek, and Mishpat, they cover over levadecha. You can't feel that you're getting directly from the Eibishter because you're getting from his midas, from Chesed and Racham and Tzedek and Mishpat. But if you know levadecha, if a Yid is zoich, that he has a relationship with levadecha with the Eibishter himself, but then that the levadecha comes down also into Chesed, Racham and Tzedek and Mishpat, so then the Chesed and the Racham and the Tzedek and the Mishpat are not covering over the levadecha; they're bringing the levadecha closer to us. This is a pshat and a bracha of Shmoneser. That's what I did. I touched one of the brachas of Shmoneser. And then, of course, we finished Melech, Eiv, Tzedakah, Mishpat. That also has to be analyzed. And if, of course, during that Seder Yemei Tshuva, we say, Ha-Melech, Ha-Mishpat. I'm not going to go into those pratim right now. Why am I telling this to you? I'm telling this to you because that's exactly what our Maamar is about. Our Maamar starts off that in order for something to come from the Eibishter to us, it needs to go through intermediates, Mumutsoyim. In the Siddur, it's called Shefet and Yeyetz. In the Maamar, it's going to be called Goyro. In the Maamar, it's going to be called Urim V'Tumim. In the Maamar, it's going to be called Ruach HaKodesh. And in the Maamar, it's going to be called Ksofim. Cheshbeinis from Geld. Huh? I'll tell you in a second. La'asid Lavi, it says in the Medrash, that we're going to get from HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'yatzmei, not through a Goyro, and not through Urim V'Tumim, and not through Ruach HaKodesh, and not through Ksafim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Levadei. And then the Rebbe is going to prove that even L'asad Lavi, there's also going to be those things. There's going to be Goydel and Urim V'Tumim, and there's going to be Ruach HaKodesh, and there's going to be Kesef. But they're going to come after the Levadech. First, there's going to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'yatzmei. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to come down into Goydel and Urim V'Tumim and Ruach HaKodesh and Ksafim. And then you have both milas. You have Taka Kodesh Baruch Hu B'yatzmei, and you have that it's coming to you through the levush, through the garments of Goyrol and Urim V'Tumim and Ruach HaKodesh and Ksafim. What's our... Okay, let me now tell you what's going on. I gave you an introduction. What's our Maamar about? Our Maamar is about Chalukas Oretz, the division of Eretz Yisrael. That when Yidden got Eretz Yisrael in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua ben Nun, the Torah says how Eretz Yisrael was distributed. It says Ach B'Goyrol, it was done with Ruach HaKodesh, Al Pi Aloza with Urim V'Tumim, and it also says Veistach, that Beirav L'Ma'at, they didn't divide it equally, everybody got a piece based on the financial value. So in Chumash it says that when Yidden were given Eretz Yisrael, there were different factors. There was Geidel, there was Urim V'Tumim, which comes along with Ruach HaKodesh, and then there was also a financial cheshbon, a cheshbon of guilt. All these things work together to divide Eretz Yisrael. When Mashiach comes, it says in Medrash, it's going to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu alone. The problem is, it also says in Medrash that even Asad Love is going to be Api HaGoyel. So the Rebbe is going to ask this kasha. If the difference between the Chaluk in times of Moshe Rabbeinu, the way Eretz Yisrael was divided in times of Moshe Rabbeinu, it required Goydel, Urim V'Tumim, Ruach HaKodesh, Ksafah. And L'Asad Love HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmei, why is L'Asad Love going to be also Goydel? And the Rebbe answers, because the L'Asad Love, the Goydel comes after HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Goydel, the Urim V'Tumim, and the Ruach HaKodesh, and the Ksafim cover over Hashem. You don't see that's coming directly from Hashem. You see that's coming through a Goydel, and through a V'Tumim, through a HaKodesh, and Ksafim. Last of love, you're going to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to then come down into Goydel, and Urim V'Tumim, and Ruach HaKodesh, and Ksafim. So it's not going to be covering over HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's going to bring it closer to us. That's what this Maimed is. And that's why I gave it the Adam of this Barach of Shmoneh Esrei, because I believe that this is the Pshat in this Barach. When Mashiach comes first, we ask for Sheftayach and Yetzayach. What do the Sheftayach teach you? They teach you the Eibishter's Torah. What are Yetzayach giving you? They're teaching you how the Eibishter's Torah works for you. So the Pearl Mamish is the Eibishter, it's not Sheftayach, it's not Yetzayach. But you can't relate to the Eibishter himself, because the Eibishter is Helam. So the Eibishter's words come through to the Shofet and the Yoyetz, and in your experience, they're giving you the Eibishter's Chochmah, they're giving you the Eibishter's Torah, which is like the division of the Goydel in the times of the Midbar. The Taka, when you throw a Goydel, and it comes out a certain Chelik to a certain Shofet, the Eibishter made that come out, but you don't see the Eibishter, you see the Goydel, because the Goydel is a Lavush that covers over HaKadosh Baruch. And the same is true Urim V'Tumim, also the Eibishter. But you see a Koyin and you see Ruach HaKodesh, you don't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmei. L'Asad Lavei, there's going to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmei, and we're going to see that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmei. And then it's going to come down into the different steps of Goydel and Urim V'Tumim and Ruach HaKodesh and Ksafim, like it says in the Bracha. U'Maleich Aleinu Atah Hashem Levadecha, L'Asad Lavei, Hashem is a king himself, without a shefet and without a yayet. And then the next words, b'chesed, b'rachamim, b'tzedek, b'mishpat. It comes on into chesed, it comes on into rachamim, comes on into tzedek, it comes on into mishpat. But you see that it's havaya levadecha. You don't see how the shefet and the yayets are covering over havaya levadecha. They're a gili of havaya levadecha. And that's this maimer. That's it. Can't see any I told you the whole maimer. It's a maimer from Parshas Pinchos. We're holding Boaz Chanan, and I apologize for being behind. Part of the reason is because last week I wasn't here. The Maimer we were supposed to learn today, Vishinantum Levanecha, is a Boaz Chanan Maimer. B'lined, we'll learn it next Friday. Everything is the Bashgocha Protos. Hakal b'mazla talye, afil sefer Torah shebeheichel. So we're learning this Maimer today. The Nekud of this Maimer is to explain the similarity and the difference between Chalukas Ha'aretz in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu and Chalukas Ha'aretz when Mashiach comes, and the difference is what I told you. That in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Chalukah came through others. And you didn't see the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Levadach. L'Asad Lavei, the Chalukah is going to come through HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it's going to come down into the Goydel, the Urim V'Tumim, and the Ruach HaKodesh, and the Ksafim. There should be, so to speak, behis lapshus. Okay, so now, if you have no questions, I will begin to learn the Maimed. I intend on learning this Maimed in order. I also intend on finishing it. It's not a hard Maimed. It's a lot of pages, but it's nit kashvere. Last time's Maimed, the Maimed from 2 weeks ago, we learned also almost all of it. I didn't even come in. I did it in my house. I left out one Amid, which I'm hoping to do one night this week. I have all kinds of plans. But as they say in Yiddish, plans are made to be broken. Pläne, weißt du, ein Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. But if you have no questions or comments, we're going to start to learn. Okay? So let me put on my glasses so I can hear you. And I'll take my glasses off, and now you can hear me. Here we go. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Lamer, to repeat to the Jewish people, this is how Eretz Yisrael should be divided. Skip the parentheses. How should it be divided? It should be divided with a gate. It says in the Gemara Bava Basra, skip the parentheses. Eretz Yisrael was divided with a cheshbon of financial value. It wasn't random. Everybody got a piece. However the Eibishter decided, they got a piece seichel. Everybody got a financially equal piece. It was worth in dollars the same amount of money. Hainu b'shuma, they calculated base kura keneged base saw tev hakela fi adamim. That if you got a good fertile piece of land, like if you lived in the land of Naphtali or Yisachar or Zvulun or Gad in the north of Eretz Yisrael, you got small areas, but they were very fertile. I lived in the south of Eretz Yisrael, like Yehuda and like Shimon, like Yosef, you got very large areas, but it was desert, it was Trashim, it wasn't good land. So there was a cheshbon to the division of Eretz Yisrael. Then it says, begoidel, it was also done with a goidel, and then it says it was also done with a betum. The division of Eretz Yisrael happened 3 or 4 different times, and the correct word is simultaneously. Haketzad, here's how. Allah is wearing betumim. Allah is wearing betumim. V'kilfish al shvatim, v'kilfish al tchumen menachem. There's 2 piles. One girdle has the names of each one of the 12 shvatim. The other girdle is a division of 1/12 of Eretz Yisrael. He would be mechaven hakedesh, and he would say, today, now is going to come out Shevet so and so, and they're going to have this piece. So first they sat down with a map. They divided up into 12 parts, not in size, in financial value. And they didn't say who gets what. They put them in a hat. Then they took 12 names and put them in the other hat. And in one instant, 3 things occurred. The Goydel determined which Shevet gets what. The Urim V'Tumim announced that this Shevet is going to get this piece and this Shevet is going to get this piece, and it was Lafi Adamim. It had a financial. It was equitable. It was down to earth, equitable. Yisachar couldn't complain. Naphtali couldn't complain. How come I got a small piece? Because the ground was unbelievably fertile. That's how it was done. So there was a simultaneous convergence of 3 different inyanim. Goydel, which Bechal doesn't make sense. Urim V'Tumim, which is Eim Haruach HaKodesh, and then Damim, which is completely seichelic, and all 3 converged. Now, who did all this? Who did all this? The Eibishter did all this. Everybody understands that Goydel comes from the Eibishter. Urim V'Tumim certainly comes from the Eibishter. But a Basar of Adam who looks at this doesn't see the Eibishter. He sees Goydel, he sees Ruach HaKodesh, he sees Cheshbon, and he forgets that it's the Eibishter. V'haraya, even when a Navi tells people that yesterday was Tisha B'Av, and we read Kinnis. Kinnis are heartbreaking. Even big tzaddikim. Even, by the way, I learned Perek Echad Layim in Rambam, and we're learning Hilchos Nevuah. Today, for those who learn Perek Echad Layim, we're finishing Yesod Yatei, we're learning Perek Yud of Nevuah. So yesterday was Perek Test. Big tzaddikim had a problem listening to a Navi. If the Eibishter tells you, you're going to argue with him. The Navi is repeating the words of the Eibishter. Somehow, you didn't experience it that way. So in ancient times, the Goydel, the Urim V'Tumim, and Ruach HaKodesh, and the Kesef, the Damim, the business Cheshbon, all came together to divide Eretz Yisrael. Of course it came from the Eibishter, but Yidden didn't see the Eibishter. And the Rebbe continues and he says, that's what happened in the times of Yeshua. Mashenkim Gola the love Mashiach comes, the Gemara says, this is a Gemara in Baba Basra. The division, lost of love, is different than it is now. The Eibush is going to divide it by himself, and he brings it right from a pasuk in Yecheskel. What does that mean? That then we're going to see how Hashem is making the division. So to speak, Atzmus, we're going to see how Atzmus and Hus is making the division. Number 3 in your text. We all know the kashas of the Rabbeim skip the parentheses. How could you say a division of Eretz Yisrael happens by HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba'atzmei when we have a Fedish Psukim and Rayas that lost of love? It's also going to be a Gedel. For example, the pasuk at the end of the Nil. Skip the parenthesis. V'ata lech leketz v'tanuach v'tamed legero chalekes hayom, and the Mashiach comes, it's also going to be a Gedel. So the Rebbe says, so what's the difference? When Yidden left Mitzrayim, there was a Goydel, there was Urim V'Tumim, Ruach HaKodesh, there was a Cheshbon. We all know it came from the Eibishter, but it also had other things. La'asad Lavid is going to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's also going to be a Goydel, so what's the difference? That's the kasha. And the Rebbe continues, Ve'ed Zeis Isa B'Gemara. Number 4, Nachalach steht in the Gemara. B'chiluk shebein HaChalukah shel Elam Hazeh leChalukah shel Elam Haba. Another difference between the 2 Chalukas is that now it was divided into 12 parts. Lein is Chalka Ela L'shnei Masa Shvatim. And the last words on page Shema in Ches, Las Lavet is Chalk L'Shleisha Asa Shvatim. That when the Yid Eibush to divide Eretz Yisrael in historic times, Shevet Levi didn't get a piece. When Mashiach comes, Shevet Levi will get a piece. This is a Bissel Shver, because Bepashtas, the 13th Chela goes to the Nasi, goes to Mashiach. but the Chmein is not necessarily a kasha. I didn't look it up. But the Rebbe says that the 13th chelik over here goes to Shevet Levi. Top of Shema Tes, V'gam, another thing. She'elam has it, in this world, Adam Yeshle Sada Lovan, Ainli Sada Padas, Sada Padas, and Sada Lovan. Now, Taket, everybody got a equal piece in terms of dollars. But the pieces were not the same. One got a smaller piece of fertile ground, another one got a larger piece of desert-like ground, and Asad Lavi, everyone's going to get everything. In other words, that Hashem is going to divide it in such a way that not only is it going to be fair, it's going to be equal. Everyone's going to get a little piece of fertile land. Everyone's going to get a little piece of desert. Everyone's going to get a little piece of forest. We're all going to get all types. So the division is going to be even more equitable than it was. So here, this becomes all very complicated. Number one, how could you say that Lasad Lavi? HaKadosh Baruch Hu divided, it's a pasuk in Daniel Gedel. Number two, why Levi? And number three, since it says in Chazal that Lasad Lavi every year gets every piece, that's the most down-to-earth cheshbon possible. That you don't say, I'll give you a small piece of fertile land, I'll take for myself a larger piece of desert land. But everybody gets an equal piece of each type. It's so down to earth, it's so business friendly, it's so ksofim. Where's HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'atzmei in that? And later on in the Maamar, the Rebbe is going to mention also that Lasad Lavi did the Betumim. Everything that happened on Moshe Rabbeinu, the Goydel, the Betumim, the Ruach HaKodesh, and the ksofim, are going to happen to Lasad Lavi, but nevertheless we call it a chalukah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'atzmei. And the Rebbe says, why? Why are we calling it a chalukah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'atzmei? Now, the primary question of this Maamar is the one I told you in my introduction. What's the difference between chalukah when Moshe Rabbeinu made the chalukah and the chalukah of Lasad Lavi? When Moshe Rabbeinu made the chalukah, there was a Goydel, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Betumim, and Ksafim. Lasad Lavi would be the same thing. So what does it mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei? L'chayda in the Midbar was also HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei. But that question does not get answered until much later in the Maamar. Page Shin, Pei Beis, I suppose. Okay? Now the Rebbe is going to go off into a Maamar Muzgir, and it's going to take 2 whole pages. Let me give a big arichas about Levi. Why is it that La'asad Lavi, Levi is going to get a piece of Eretz Yisrael, and the Rebbe is going to ask a kasha b'manavshach? If they were supposed to get a piece, why didn't they get it historically? And if they couldn't get it historically, why are they going to get it La'asad Lavi? And of course the answer is going to be because Levi is mufresh from this world. And Gashmiitz and Ruchnius are a contradiction. La'asad Lavi, they're not going to be such a big contradiction. Let's read quick. Pedic number 5. Let's connect it to the fact that Hashem is dividing it himself. That Yitel Gam Shevet Levi Chelik V'Nachalot, that Levi is also going to take a piece. And this will help us understand furthermore that even though La'asad Lavi, the division is going to happen by the Eibishter himself, when we explain why historically Levi couldn't get a piece, and La'asad Lavi, Levi will also be able to get a piece, we will understand how there's no contradiction between saying that La'asad Lavi, the Eibishter, makes the Chalukah himself and is done through a goy. Let's preface. In order to explain, La'asad Lavi Yitel Gam Shevet Levi Chelik B'Nachala, why when Mashiach comes, Levi will get a portion. And originally they didn't get a portion. Says Rabbi Dihine, Hatam Lekach, the reason for this fact, Shebetchila Leinis Chalka Eretz Yisrael Elo L'Shneimas Shvatim, why Levi didn't get a piece. Eretz Yisrael was divided into 12 parts. That means to say Menashe and Ephraim. It's because like it says in the Rambam, when Shekosav Rambam B'Sifri Yali HaChazaka, Shedel Mepnei Sheshevet Levi Huvdal Lamed Lavedes Hashem L'Sharse V'Chulu. Levi was separated to serve Hashem. Leficha Huvdlu Midarki Ha'elam, they removed from the ways of this world. Elem Chel Hashem, to the Eibishter's army. V'Hu Baruch Hu Zeichon, the Eibishter gives him the schus of Parnasa. Shenem, as the Pasuk says, Ani Chelkecha V'Nachalascha, that the Eibishter is the Chelik and the Nachal of Shevet Levi. And then the Rebbe says in the bracket, also in the Rambam, Loi Shevet Levi Bilvad. This is not limited to Shevet Levi. Alakol Ish V'ish, any human being, including a goy, who donates his spirit, Lamed Lifnei Hashem L'Shor Seyu La'ov, the standing of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as his servant. So then Yi Havaya Chelke V'Nachalose, Hashem becomes his Chelik and his Nachal. And the Lashon Rambam finishes, Harei Ze Niskadesh, Kedesh Kadoshim, he finishes, a Yid who separates himself from the heavenly Azman, and he dedicates of God his Kadesh Kadoshim, like it says in the Pasuk, Ani Yechalcha v'Nachaloscha. It finishes with the words Ata Teimech Geroli. That's how Sefer Zerayim and Rambam finishes. So Levi didn't get a piece in Yisrael because Gashmis is Astir Teruchnius, Pashut. This is the famous Rambam. A person who decides that his life is Avedis Hashem and Heavenly Azman are not his thing, the Eibush says, you know what? You're on me. I'll look after you. Says that Rebbe Valf became nevertheless, Yechidish Lasid Lavu, when Mashiach comes, and the Chayid is going to be even higher Madrega of Ruchnius. That Yiteisev Eitzel Shevet Levi Chelik Ba'aras, Yidden get a piece of Eretz Yisrael, and the Shaila becomes, how do you work that out? How could a Levi get a Chelik in the Gash music world and still be Chelkiv and Nachalas Yishallah Kadosh Baruch? Okay? And of course, the Rebbe finishes the paragraph by saying that Chas v'Shalom to think that after Mashiach comes, Levi is no longer the Porush, the Muvdal Mehevli Asman that he was. Forget. He's still the Porush, but there's no contradiction between Gashmias and Ruchnias. So after Mashiach comes, Levi gets a Chelik Baruch like all other Yidden, but Levi is going to be different, because Levi's Avodah is still going to be Lihibodel Mehevli Asman, and to be Avav the Avedis Hashem, and that the Gashmias is not going to be a stira to the Ruchnias. Next paragraph. Is basically find the difference between Geil and Malas Yosef. That Yosef Atzadik is higher than his other 11 brothers, the Shvatim, but he's even higher than Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. How so? Then he Ovis, the Ovis were a chariot. In order to retain that status as a Merkava, turn the page. They had to be shepherds. It says in Sifrei Pashtonim. And it's brought in Chassidus. Saying maybe these brothers shepherds don't work very hard. They're very different than farmers who plant. And they're out in the fields and in the forests. Skip the bracket. And when you're out in the field and the forest with your shep salach, and you're not working very hard because the sheps are eating and drinking, all you gotta do is watch them. To be a chariot for Hashem, you can't be in this world. So the Shvatim and even the Yavis chose to be by profession shepherds because it's not so labor intensive. They didn't have to work so hard, so they're able to be involved in Ruchnius. Who's the exception? 4 lines into page Shin Pei, Mashenkin be Yosef. Yosef is different. Nemar, by Yosef it's written, he comes into the Parai's house to do his work. That Afilu be'eretz Mitzrayim, Ubein Einam Yehudim, in Egypt, amongst Goyim. And remember, his family wasn't there, he was there alone. He was a complete balabas in Mitzrayim. At the same time, and the Rebbe says in Yiddish, es hat in ganz nit angerührt. It didn't touch at all. The work of being Yosef HaTzadik, with all of the miles that Yosef HaTzadik has. That Yosef HaTzadik was higher than the others of the Shvatim, that he was in a state of Dvekas Nelakus when he was busy doing the accounting. From Mitzrayim, there was no contradictions. Van a word from Rebbe Nishma says, from Friedrich and Rebbe, or what Rebbe Solneach. Solneach was a big chassid. He wasn't Yosef HaTzadik, but he was a big chassid. So the Rebbe Rayat, or the Rebbe Rashab said, Yisrael Neach steht in Buchhalterei und Tracht Yichurei Lo. Yisrael Neach is in the bookkeeping department. He was a bookkeeper. He was a mathematician. And he's thinking Yichurei Lo. He was in a different universe. Yosef HaTzadik, he stand in the Buchhalterei und got Yichurei Lo. That means that the idea that Shevet Levi, in order to be Chalke v'Nachalas Yishallah Kadosh Baruch, to be the Eibishter's favorites, that they're involved in Avedis Hashem and they divorce themselves from the shtusim of the world. And therefore, the Ein Lam Chelik Ba'aretz, they don't have, because they contradict each other. La'asig Lave, they're not going to contradict each other, like Yosef. And if they're not going to contradict each other, but they can have Gashmis also, and it's also part of Ani Chalek V'Nachal. And the Rebbe continues, V'Yeseirim is there, moreover, to be sure, Davka Ha'in the Yosef Hurat Mitzrayim, Yosef's going into Mitzrayim. Hoya Achon Alakach had set up the fact, Yaakov would come to Mitzrayim. That he's going to go into Mitzrayim and then come out of Mitzrayim. Why? In order for Yaakov Avinu and his family to go into Mitzrayim. And then to come out of Golus and to go into Geula and to take with them from the spoils of Mitzrayim. You need to have a very, very great light, and Yosef HaTzadik provided that. Yosef went ahead of them. And he brought to Mitzrayim a moed and dika oir. What was the oir? It was an oir that's so high that there's no contradiction between Vayavay Habayis Elasis Malachte and Dveikas Nelikus. Only Yosef could do it. Yosef was working in Mitzrayim as the big macher, running the whole country and really providing life, support, food for the entire world. And at the same time, he was in a state of Dveikas. This light gave the koyach that later Yaakov and his family would come into Mitzrayim. And with the koyach that Yosef HaTzadik planted, they'll be able to go out of Mitzrayim. And the Rebbe gives a dugma. In Chassidus, there's a sugya called chinuch. There's even a mime from the middle of Rebbe in Shara Tshuva, which is called chinuch. I never learned the mime, but it's called chinuch. The source of chinuch in Chassidus is the chinuch cotton. Yeah, chinuch means you raise a child. And the way it's brought in the Maimorim, the Rebbe says it here, that when you raise a child, the first day you take him to school, you make a big deal. You give him toys, and you make a party, you make a big celebration. What does he learn that day? Very little. The day later, he learns a little bit more, and he gets less of a celebration. Till eventually, going to school becomes by him a dover aposhet, becomes a natural thing, and no one makes a big deal out of it. Why? Because it's like a chasana. The day a couple gets married, you make a big deal. Because who in their right mind would want to get married? So you make a big deal out of it. And once they're married, then it becomes normal. So the chinuch has to be in the beginning. So it says in Chassidus, you have the Maamar of the Chadedi also, that the beginning, the initial investment in making something special happen is a oir godel. It's a makif light, but it's a oir godel. So the Rebbe says, Yosef HaTzadik was the oir godel. That was mechanech Mitzrayim. And gave a koyach for Yaakov and his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren to go into Mitzrayim and come out. So not only is Yosef going to Mitzrayim in such a way that Yosef was in a state of dveikas nelakus, and it did not contradict his Vayaveh Habayis Elasis Malachte, it gave a koyach for Yitgolos Mitzrayim and from Geulas Mitzrayim. So the Rebbe says, V'alachas kama v'kama 8 lines from the bottom of the page, B'negeya la'achon li'yidas Mitzrayim. If Yosef is the Oyer Godel that's preparing the Yid is going into Mitzrayim, Shesham tzarech lachar any golos, we have to transform golos. Shezeu in shlei berach Yosef meshar chinuch shoyer bayis ishna bayisheni. If by the Beis Hamikdash needs a chinuch, going into golos for sure needs a chinuch. And if the chinuch of the first and second Beis Hamikdash has to be an Oyer Godel, the Oyer Godel needed to go into golos, and going out of golos has to be an even greater Oyer Godel. And then he adds Masha Einkin 5 lines from the bottom. I believe that the Rebbe is being meramis on 2 things. When Yidden went into Golos Mitzrayim and went out of Mitzrayim, they went in and out because there was an Eir Godel in the way of Chinuch, which was Yosef HaTzadik. And the Rebbe continues, same as through Mashiach. What happens when Mashiach comes? It says that Kohol Godel Yeshuvu Heina, Yidden come back as a great community. 4 lines from the bottom of the page. Every individual, no Jew is left behind. Who made them together from all over the world. And of course, clearly, when Yidden were in Mitzrayim, they were not all over the world. That's why I'm reading that this goes on both Goliaths. The koyach of Yosef HaTzadik, which is an neshama beguf, a human being in this world, for whom the Gashmias Shebegashmias and the Ruchnias Sheberuchnias are not a contradiction at all. He sets up, he is the Oyer Godel, that you can go into Golos in Mitzrayim and come out of Golos Mitzrayim. You can go into this final Golos, which is Evdei Meretz Ashon, Dachabetz Mitzrayim, Golos of Anis, Golos of Ashira, scattered all over the world. And to survive, the Koyach comes from Yosef HaTzadik, top of page Shin Pei Aleph. Hare Muvanat Kama, it's self-understood how much. Tzarachlias Teisveis, Eides, V'hamshoches, V'hashpois, extra light, extra drawings down, and extra flow, which sets up and is mechanech this idea. So the Rebbe says, which explains, Levi when Mashiach comes, Levi gets a piece in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because Yidden did not give Levi a piece in Eretz Yisrael historically, because Hashem said, because when Yidden in Eretz Yisrael originally, if you wanted to be Shevet Levi, you had to be removed. They were contradictory. Says the Rebbe Favos, because it's not going to be a contradiction. Lakach to the fact, When Yidden try the first time, if you're involved in Gashmias, Hashem can't be Chalka v'Nachaloscha. Lo Asad Lavi Levi will still be in the higher Madrega of Chalka v'Nachaloscha, and they're going to have Gashmias Dikaland as well. Elayuchli is Adam Chedesh v'Zerei v'Chulu u'biyachadim zeh yibamay midamativ hein hamar kavo beifanele b'Yisrael derachama b'Yisrael. And that's the Chiddush of Yasad Lavi, that Shevet Levi is like Yosef HaTzadik. They draw koyach from Yosef HaTzadik, and they have finished up. He's a move on. Let's stop here. Kum Tochoiset, that we explain why historically Levi, in order to be Levi, couldn't get a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. And the Yasad Lavi, the same Levi with the same avodah, must get a chelik in Eretz Yisrael, not because the avodah changes, but the ability to bring opposites together is stronger. Stop. Finished. A point. We just learned a point. We answered one of the 3 or 4 questions which this Maamar asks, which is the question, if Shevet Levi gets a chelik ba'aretz la'ased, why didn't it get a chelik ba'aretz originally? And if it didn't get a chelik originally, why does it get a chelik la'ased? And the answer is because they're in a higher madrege, like Yosef HaTzadik. So Gashmis and Ruchnias are not contradictory. Questions or comments? If you're good, I'm good. Now go back to the other question. La'ased Lavi, is it HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmai or is it Geirel? Which one is it? So the Rebbe says, move on page Shin Pei Aleph, the second paragraph, the middle of the paragraph. It's understood, La'ased Lavi Yegamin Geirel, even though we said that the Eibishter himself is dividing up Eretz Yisrael. At the same time, there's going to be a Geirel. And he explains the change, just like the idea that Shevet Levi, the Eibishter is his chelik. The idea that the Eibishter is a chelik of Shevet Levi is connected to Geirel. Why? Because the Rambam brings a pasuk. Look at the last words of the paragraph. Hashem enos chelki v'keisi ata teimir Geirol. So we in a Geirel. The Rebbe, what he did, the Rebbe just did was he transferred the kasha to a Rambam. And we have a kasha. La'ased Lavi, it says that Kadosh Baruch Hu is dividing up Eretz Yisrael itself, and it says in Psukim Geirel. So the Rebbe said, let me ask you a question. It says in the end of Sefer Zrayim of Rambam, based on Psukim, that Shevet Levi doesn't have a chelik ba'aretz because the Eibishter is his chelik. And then it says, V'loi Shevet Levi b'lvad, anybody who wants, Kol bo yoylo, that separates himself from the Havli as man, could become a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on this Kadesh, Kedesh, Kadoshim. And it finishes by saying that the Eibishter is your Geirel. So the Rebbe said, I want to say Kashan Rambam. I say Kashan Rambam. If the Rambam holds that Shevet Levi is Chelk v'Nachlas from the Eibishter himself, and the Eibishter is Chelk and Nachla of Shevet Levi, so why does he bring a pasuk that speaks about Geirel? In other words, instead of asking the Kasha on the Midrashim and the Gemara that say that now was through a Geirel, La'ased Lavi, the Kadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmai, ask it on a Rambam. Same kasha. What's the teretz? The teretz is that, of course, La'ased Lavi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be Chelki v'Nachas of Shevet Levi. Forget, even higher. V'haraya, they can have a Chelik in Eretz Yisrael, because Gashmit and Ruchni is not a contradiction. And still, the Eibishter is Chelik in Nachla, and it's called Geirel. So what's the difference between the Geirel, La'ased Lavi, and the Geirel transformation? And the answer, again, I'm repeating what I told in the beginning, because the Geirel in the times of Moshe covered over the HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmai. The Geirel La'ased Lavi is going to be the Gilui of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmai. It's going to come after. Show you. That's what the Rebbe is going to explain. Okay, now I plan to teach this Maamar in order, but I'm going to skip a little bit now. Okay, I want to do the last 2 lines on the bottom of this page. Shin Pei Aleph. I'm going to go back to Pei de Gimel later. I'm skipping a little bit, okay? I didn't write it in my introduction. When I wrote out the numbers, I didn't do it this way, but I'm going to be skipping a little bit, okay? The Alter Rebbe has an Igeres HaKiddush in Tanya called Zayin. Ashreinu matev chalkeinu u'noim goyraleinu miyafiru shaseinu. And he asks a Pashat Kasha. What does it mean? V'sein chalkeinu b'seir secha. What does it mean? Matev chalkeinu manoim goyr aleinu. Isn't every yid be mechuyev to mechuyev all the mitzvahs? If every yid is mechuyev to do all the mitzvahs, how can you say chalkeinu b'seir secha? How could you say Matev chalkeinu manoim goyr aleinu? So Alter Rebbe answers. It's Tanya. There's a Kedesh Zayin. We're going to be learning it in about a week and a half. Now we're still doing Dalet. We're going to get to Zayin in a few more days. That every Yid has to do the whole Torah. But he brings the Gemara that you know of Avuch Mayav Zohar Tfei. Every Yid has to take all the mitzvahs. But one mitzvah is the Zohar Tfei. Like the Lashon that's always brought is it's the Shar. It's the Knesset through which all the Torah mitzvahs enter. And the Rebbe said that now the Zohar Tfei is Lahavi Lemeisa Mashiach, right? Lekabel Pnei Mashiach Tzedkeinu B'Poyel Mamish. And the Rebbe said it doesn't mean you're part of all mitzvahs. It's the pshat that all mitzvahs go through this shar. And that's how the Alter Rebbe explains Goydel and Chelik. That even though every year is Mechuyev to Kol HaTorah Kula, every year is a Chelik and a Goydel, his Zohar Tfei. But then he explains that the Chelik and the Goydel, which is the Zohar Tfei of a Yid, cannot be explained al pi seichel. Doesn't make sense. It's l'mayla min ha-seichel legamre. So on the one hand, every Yid has to keep all Torah mitzvahs. On the other hand, every Yid has a Zohar Tfei, has a Libei Chafet, has an Ikir of his Avodah. And that this second idea, that every Yid has a Zohar Tfei, is called Goydel. It's l'mayla min ha-tam v'adas legamre. That's how the Alter Rebbe writes this Igeres HaKedesh. Look at the last two lines on the page. This is word for word. That when you want to say that something doesn't make any sense, you say lamata hu bechinas hagoydel. In this world is goydel. When you throw a lottery, you're making things subject to chance. So since it's not a seichelic thing, you got this portion for this reason. You got this portion for this reason. This is like Yifanatz Muslim who's L'mayla Mitam Vadas. Says the Rebbe, L'mayla Mitam Vadas is called Goydel. And then it finishes with the word Mamish. I actually opened up the Tanya this morning and I looked inside. That's how this Igeres HaKedesh finishes. Shadugmose Lamato Bechinas HaGeidel Mamish Ad Kan Leshoinoi. So the Rebbe says as well. Goydel is a mechanism, right? Goydel is a tool. It's a way of figuring things out. If I don't know what to do, I throw a Goydel. But Goydel is also a concept. The concept of Goydel is L'mayla mitam vadas, mamish. Hervert. The Alter Rebbe's words. Goydel is L'mayla mitam vadas, mamish. So the Rebbe is now going to explain. The kasha we have is, Hashem is dividing up Yisrael, or the Goydel is dividing up Yisrael? So the answer is Hashem is dividing up Yisrael, and it's called Goydel. How could they both be true? So he gave us the dugma from Levi, that when Levi goes to an even higher level, then Gashmias and Ruchnias are not a contradiction. Similarly, when you go to an even higher level, HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzmai and Goydel are not a contradiction. And that's the answer to the question. The Rebbe is going to explain it. You'll see. Don't trust me yet. You'll see it in the words of the Rebbe inside. That in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Goydel covered over HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei. During the V'tumim and the Ruach HaKodesh covered over HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei. The Cheshbon, the Ksafim certainly covered over HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei. La'ased Lavi, there'll also be a Goydel. And the Rebbe is going to say inside, there'll also be During the V'tumim, there'll also be Ksafim. But it's going to be because there'll be a higher level. So the Eibishter himself is called Goydel Mamish. L'mayla mitam vadas, that comes down into mamish. That's how the Rebbe is going to answer the question. Like I told you in my introduction, if the comes first, so then the chesed and the racham and the tzedek and mishpat are not a steer to levadecha. But if you have sheftayach and v'reshenu tzayach and v'tchila, you don't see the levadecha. So in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, there was a Goydel, and they covered over the levadecha. And L'asad Lavi, they won't. Because the meaning of the word Goydel here doesn't mean primarily a lottery. It means L'mayla mitam vadas, mamish. Look at the words of the Rebbe. Lamata, that means in this world. She'inyin sh'L'mayla vadas lamata, in this world. Hu b'chinas haGoydel mamish. Now turn to page Shin Pei Beis and let's learn. When you say that anything which is l'mayla mitam vadas is called goydel mamish, and we're not using the word goydel as a lottery, we're using the word goydel as l'mayla mitam vadas, you should know there's two parts to this. What are they? Kimirum is gam b'hateves. Hisaf is goydel mamish. The Alter Rebbe says goydel. The word mamish I circle. That's mamish. Sheyesh b'beis pirushim. There's two taichen in it. Al derech hamavu bepirush chelik lekami mal mamish. When it says in Tanya in the second painting that a Yiddish in his shom is a chelik lekami mal mamish. Yesh b'beis k'tzavis. There's two extremes. On the one hand, it's a lekam mamish. It's mamish eibishter. And on the other hand, v'lashas mamoshes. It's physical and you can touch it. Says the Heilig Rebbe al derech zebenigel lebechinas hagedel mamish. When you talk about the idea of goydel mamish, there's two extremes in goydel mamish. Shalachein meviim al zeh shtei hadugmos. You have two examples for the avoida of goydel mamish: the lowest possible avoida and the highest possible avoida. And when you bring together the lowest possible avoida and the highest possible avodah, there is no contradiction between saying Hakadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei is mechelik es haaretz, and the chalukas haaretz happens through a goydel and urim v'tumim and even cheshbon. That's how the Maamar goes. Okay, go back to the previous page, Shin Pei Aleph. I'm 99% sure that what I'm doing is correct. Okay? We have a kasha and we have a teretz. The kasha is Hashem dividing Eretz Yisrael, or the Goydel dividing Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe says they're this La'asad Lavi, they'll be the same thing. In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, they weren't. La'asad Lavi, they're going to be Goydel and Mamish. They're not going to be a contradiction. And the raya is that Levi is going to have a chelik in the world Begashmias. Now let's go back and learn this in Avodah. Pay the Gimel. Okay? Now, if you're not clear, or if you think I'm making it up too much, you're welcome to interrupt me now and argue with me. Otherwise, I'm going to read on. I mean it. Okay? What I just told you, I think, is the key to the Maamar. And although it's not 100% explicit, I believe this is the pshat. This is the pshat of what the Rebbe is trying to say. So let's go. Gimel. We know that every time the Mashiach comes, it has to do with the work we do now. They cause everything which is the Yasad Lavi. Caleb, which includes, on the one hand, on the one hand, the Chaluk of Yasad Lavi, the Eibishter himself does. And at the same time, that Yasad Lavi is going to be a Goydel. Like the Rambam says, that on the one hand it's Ani Chalkecha, and on the other hand it's called Goydel. And they're not a contradiction, so the Rebbe says there has to be an Avodah which parallels this. How they move, and it's understood, the work that we do at the end of Golos, skip the bracket, we do work. Goydel, which is called Goydel. And if I understand it correctly, Goydel includes the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself does the Chalukah, and the idea of Goydel Mamish doing the Chalukah. And the Rebbe explains in the next paragraph. All the Rabbeim teach us. Chelik HaNefesh is a piece of the Neshama. Shuhureish, it's the head, Uklolos, and the general, Ve'etzem, and the essence, HaNefesh. Sh'al of Aim, and then this level of the Neshama, we say, in any day I don't know. Lo yadaiti es nafshi, I don't know my own Neshama. Or, like Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai said, Eini yedea be'ez derech melichanese. My own Etzem, I don't know. Behind this means. Shafapish, how he says, Legedel la'afla, Rabbi Yechanan ben Zakkai was an unbelievably high level. Shalamad v'limid v'shimish. He learned and he taught and he served. But actually, halach dal lamas b'leiteda v'chol we never dal lamas al teda. Skip the parenthesis. Afa b'kei named any day doesn't know. So it's the level of the neshama that doesn't know. The level of the neshama that doesn't know, this is goydel. And the implication is that even though by Moshe Rabbeinu, the goydel was also Einei Yedea. But you'll see later in the Maamar, the Rebbe is going to use words. Look at the bottom of page Shin Pei Gimel, just for a second. Look at Shin Pei Gimel. The second line from the bottom. Shin Pei Gimel, it's the future. It says, Inyan ha-goyrol shaboy yesh kvar eze inyan shal geder of Agbola. You see it? I'm not sure what's the geder of Agbola of goyrol, but that's how it was by Moshe Rabbeinu. Also, Lavid is going to be a goyrol, but the goyrol is Einei Yedea. It's a different concept. It's not goyrol, a way of ascertaining. It's a goyrol, which means above seichel completely. And the Rebbe says that this idea that in Yiddish neshama, there's a level which means I don't know. It's the level of the neshama which is higher than reason, which is the of Yechida, which is called goydel. So the Rebbe says we want to understand Yechida. We want to understand the level of the neshama, which is lamayla mitam hadas, which is called Yechida or called Einei Yedea, or it's called goydel, and it's different than the goydel of Moshe Rabbeinu. Because the goydel of Moshe Rabbeinu, what's the Rebbe's words? Eze inyan shall geder v'agbola. The goydel we're now talking about is Einei Yedea. It's really HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yat. And the Rebbe says that the way to explain it is by using the words goydel mamish. Turn to page Shin Pei Beis. 4 lines into the page. When you're talking about this idea of something which is lamayla mitam vadas lagamri Einei Yedea, it has 2 dimensions, goydel and mamish. 2 examples are brought for this. Ha'alef, the first mashal for goydel, is tachtes hamadreges, the very lowest madrege. Shezeh winyan ha'emuna. Emuna means I don't know anything, I just accept. Before a person begins, so before we daven, we say that when we say it in the beginning of davening, it's koyal amuna, which is a yerusha, which is malchus. In other words, goydel means something which is totally without reason, and the beginning of avoida, it's not that I'm smart and I'm going beyond my reason. I'm not smart, I'm just accepting something without reason. V'habeis, it's also circled. The second inyan of goydel is, which is tachas kleimas aveda, the end of all aveda. Shehu inyan ha'emuna b'b'chinas sevav kalam, that after a person understands the maximum of what could be understood, then they reach an emuna which is higher than that. Ad l'sevav ha'amiti. Shemuna zu, the second emuna balachri aveda of his bonus, it falls after work and understanding beifin shel tam vadas. We try to understand. B'chol inyan b'chinas b'malakam, everything that could be understood, and then you come to b'chinas layadaiti es nafshi, which is the opposite extreme, and then the Rebbe says in parenthesis, Ad lebechina shalamayla miktzot, it's b'yavak say altogether. Shabinyan gedel shalamayla mitamadas. That's the idea of a gedel above reason, which is either bina kesed or pnimius kesed. The Kabbalah we're going to skip. So the Rebbe says that when the Alter Rebbe says the word bechinas gedel mamish, shalamato bechinas gedel mamish, the Alter Rebbe is being menames that if something is completely mitamadas, it exists on the very, very lowest levels, and it exists in the very, very highest levels. That's the concept of goydel. It exists in the very, very lowest levels, and it exists on the very, very highest levels. And later on, you're going to see that this means gashmias and ruchnias also. And the Rebbe continues. Number 8. Ve'ed inyan bazeh, when you include in goydel the highest level, the lowest level. The 2 ideas you have in goydel. Like it says in the pasuk when you get to Purim, Alkein Karu LaYamim Ha'eda Purim Lashon Rabim. Purim means lots in plural. Afa b'shenikra Shema Purim Aged. There's only one lot. Why are you called Purim Lashon Rabim? So it says in the Maamarim, Shezeu Lefi Shesh Nigam Purim Yasad Lavi. There's Lamayla Mitam Vadas of Klipa, and there's Lamayla Mitam Vadas of Kedusha, and included in Purim Lashon Rabim is the goydel of Klipa, which is beyond seichel that's being transformed. V'inyan zayin is hapech, and it becomes eida simchas. Asan vikar achas mapur de gedush. So goydel mamish doesn't only include the highest emunah and the lowest emunah. It even includes klipa and kedusha. How klipa and kedusha all become included in goydel. In other words, in a connection to HaKadosh Baruch. Number 9. And of course, this expresses itself in practical life, in the work of Amun and Mesiras Nefesh. Now, Emunah and Mesiras Nefesh are very different, and I'm going to give you blunt words. Emunah is our generation. Mesiras Nefesh is the Friedrich Rebbe's generation. I'm putting words into the Maamar, but I think it's not so far-fetched. It says the Rebbe Hein, Mitad Emunah, Pshuta, even simple faith. Sheshayech has gone Bakal Shabakalam, which the lowest you can have, and it also includes Mitad Emunah, Kvish B'tachas HaShleim is the highest. At the Emunah, Beifan the Emunah, where Moshe Rabbeinu gives us Emunah. And the Rebbe says the Emunah of Bakal Shabakalam by himself is the Mamish, and the Emunah that comes from Moshe Rabbeinu is the Geidel. Shem Beis Han Yoram Sheba Geidel. There are two ideas in Geidel, Kvishu Baved, as it is in Avoid. Now the Rebbe doesn't say both, but I'm going to say that Mesiras Nefesh is the Friedrich Dor and Emunah is our Dor, but I'm not sure. It's special to do with the times of Golos. Especially the end of Golos, the heel of Mashiach. At the end of Golos, the primary work is Emunah and Mesiras Nefesh. This is the famous Maamar of the Rebbe Rashab, where he gives the example of the heel of the foot. The foot is the first one to listen to the command of the head. But there's no discussion. You tell him to jump, he jumps. It's easy to affect Mesiras Nefesh in a foot, as it is affect Mesiras Nefesh when it comes to the head. Skip the parenthesis. Then the effect of this Mesiras Nefesh, and the effect of this Emunah is Shemitzad Inyan Mesiras Nefesh Yesh Neitalish Poshet. Because the Mashiach, since the heel of Mashiach, all Yidden have this Emunah, and all Yidden have this Emunah. The Mesiras Nefesh, Emed, as Teres Emes, Al Moshe Rabbeinu, Teres Al Moshe Rabbeinu, Shahaya Onav Me'ed Mikol Ha'adam Shapnei Adama. Right? It says in the pasuk in Pashas Ba'aleischa that Moshe Rabbeinu was humbled, Mikol Ha'adam Shapnei Adam. And it's Mavur in Chassidus, Shanav Azu Haizeh B'Miyuchad. This humility was specifically L'gabe B'nei Yisrael Shel Mitzrayim B'Dad because of Mashiach, the Yidden in the times of the heel of Mashiach. That they learn Torah and do mitzvahs, and they don't let the Nisayon stop them. And what is the Nisayon of our time? In times of the Friedrich Rebbe, the Nisayon was Mesiras Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem. In our times, the Mesiras Nefesh is al Yevish Pnei Amaligim. And Moshe Rabbeinu looks at our boldness, our azus, and he is humbled kayach. That even Moshe Rabbeinu achieved a new level of anova. Skip the next line. Ayedei his bonus by contemplating avedes or anoshim pshutim beikvas the Mashiach, the work of the simple people. And I believe this is connected to the word mamish. There's the goydel, and then there's goydel mamish. Goydel is the highest madreges. Mamish is the lowest madreges. We're on the lowest madreges, but the emunah that we have at the lowest madreges is goydel. It's goydel mamish. In other words, it's goydel mamish in such a way where the highest high and the lowest lows are no contradiction. And Moshe Rabbeinu was humbled by this. Number Perikei. We do this work. Skip to the next line. Since we serve Hashem on a level of goydel, and a goydel doesn't mean a division. It means the idea that we serve Hashem on a level which is called Lo Yadaiti, right? Lo Yadaiti. This causes but over here Geidel doesn't mean a cheshbon. It means be'efen shakadosh baruch hu mechalek b'yatzmei. When Moshe Rabbeinu used a Geidel, that Geidel was a levush. La'asad Lavid is also going to be a Geidel, but that Geidel is going to be a Kadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei. Va'inyan b'zeh the pshat is the hine. B'negei yelin a Geidel achshav, Geidel now. In other words, Geidel the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, when the Geidel covers over a Kadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei, explains the Rebbe that even though shezah aved Hashem b'chinush b'nefesh aved Yechidah, but we know about Yechidah shenikras Yechidah Hashem shemakabelas miyachid. Yechidah is connected to Yachid. Yechidah is the fifth level of the neshama. Yachid is the neshama itself, and they're connected. That there's a spark of creation called Yechidah, which touches the spark of Creator, which is called Yachid. It says that now, when you have a goydel, Even when you're serving the Eibishter on the level of Yechida, it covers over the Eibishter. The reason why this is. Why is it that even when you're serving Hashem on a level of Goydel, it has a certain limitation, because it's okay, the Gula hasn't come yet. And the Geula will be Aydem Husev Atzmus Yizbarach Batz with Eibishter himself. Ubemela, in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Goydel cut with Yechida, only Yechida. It covered over the Yachid. And that's why the Goydel was put, the division of it was to Goydel, not to HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. Achai de Shlom es Havei, we do our work, which is the work of Goydel. Payel, and we influence. Kvayach. Shum Shech B'Bechinas HaAtzmos, we should reach the Eibishter himself. Parenthesis. Kifi Sheshayach Leimer came Ben Geil HaAtzmos, to the extent where you could possibly say about the Eibishter Hamshacha. Be'efen she is gal bechinas Yachad Shalom Alam Yechida, that Yachad and Yechida join. And when Yachad and Yechida join, even though it's called by the same name Goydel, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Yachad and Yechida were not joined, so it's called Goydel. La'asid Lava Yachad and Yechida are going to join, then it's called HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. Now, what does this mean? I have no clue what it means. But let's go to Va'ata Tetzaveh, right? You know that in Va'ata Tetzaveh there's two madregas of Yechida, remember, right? There's Yechida Sheva Nefesh, Yifi Mugderes Begeder Apshitus, and Yechida Sheva Nefesh, Etzam HaNeshama, Kvi Shemeshirashas Ba'atzmas. I think that's the pshat. The lower level of Yechida is ready for Mesiras Nefesh, but it's not ready for Kosas Lamoy because it needs Gili Alakus. The Yechida Sheva Nefesh, which is Chadem HaAtzmos, is a higher level, and it becomes Chadem Keches Pnimiyim. And the Rebbe, I'm suggesting that maybe these two madregas of Goydel, the Goydel which covers over HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi, and the Goydel which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi, in the words of the Maamar here, it's Yechida that's Helen from Yachid, and Yechida which is one with Yachid. And it's the difference in Yechida Sheba Nefesh, which is Mugdir, that's in of Mesiras Nefesh, but you can't live every day with that koyach. And the higher idea is that there's no limitations, you could live every day with that koyach. I'm just suggesting out loud. And then he continues. So B'Mela, we understand, we answered the question. What's the difference? Let's talk. Moshe Rabbeinu's chalukah was through Geidel, Unevetumim, Ruach HaKedesh, and Cheshbon. There was no HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. Last it low is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. Idea is also Geidel, because it's a different Geidel. Now the Geidel is Mailam, and last it love, the Geidel is going to be Magala HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. And then he continues. And after the Eibush does the Chalukah himself, then you bring down also Inyan HaGoydel, the idea of Goydel. As Goydel is a thing. In other words, we want to speak about Goydel, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. And after the Eibush that HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi makes the Chalukah, that comes down into Goydel, the way Goydel is separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. And then it comes down into Urna V'Tumim. Turn to page Shin Pei Dalet, Shezehu Kvar Inyan Shabbat Be'esias Ve'erois Mufuratzes. It comes down in words and in instructions. I wish I had time and seichel and help to understand what these words means. So the Rebbe says, Moshe Rabbeinu made a chalukah, Al Pi Goydel, Unevetumim, Ruach HaKedesh, and Kesef, but it was Ma'al Master HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. Lost it, love it is going to be Omelech Aleinu Atah Hashem Levadech. Then it comes down into Chesed, Berachim, Tzedek, Mishpat. That means Goydel, Unevetumim, Ruach HaKedesh, and Cheshbon, but it's not Ma'al Master HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. It's Megala HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi, and he adds even more. Shezeu K'fi Shenasa Shum B'Negel Shavias Be'elam. But remember, the Rebbe doesn't say it, but he means it. La'asad love, it's not going to be oi. In the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, you got either this piece or this piece. La'asad love, you're going to get every piece. So this is really the vort. That by Moshe Rabbeinu, the Goydel was covering over HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. And la'asad love, the Goydel is not covering over B'Yatzmi. And it comes down into Goydel. It comes down into Urna V'Tumim. So, mitzad echad, you have all the inyanim that you had by Moshe Rabbeinu, ach begoydel techolek haaretz, and mitzad hasheni, it's revealing how behind it all is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'Yatzmi. U'molech aleinu atah d'sham levadacha, b'chesed d'verachim, v'b'tzedek v'mishpat. I'm sorry, I keep bringing up the sidduch. Shay, that's more or less the Maamar. Now the truth of the matter is that this v'ha'inyan bazeh, we probably should have read when we did Perek Beis, when we did Levi. Why is it that La'asad Lovei, the Geidel is going to come from Kadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei, and it's going to come down into Geidel and Unevetumim and Ksofim and Shoveh, because Gashmis is important, which what the Rebbe said about Levi. But in Bazehu, the Pshat is, and again, he's going back to what he said about Levi. That La'asad Lovei, Lahavdil Goyim are going to do work for us. Third line into the Perek. Malach Danas Fadiachedim, other than do work for us, Mikomakum nevertheless, Yigam Oz Ha'inyan the Chelik Beret Yisrael HaGashmis. There's still going to be a piece of Eretz Yisrael HaGashmi. Kimevu, Rabbi says, Maamar Pinchos 5738Class, which is of course this week's Pasha. Pasha's was Chanan, Shebikish Liv Kanes La'aretz. Moshe wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael. Shnei Sevaria saying Nayim. He wasn't satisfied with seeing with his eyes. Next line. Moshe wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael Kadeshi Yiskai Muhammad Fisal Yodei. Moshe wasn't interested in Israeli peaches or strawberries or even roses. He was interested in mitzvahs. And he can only do mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael. It was delayed. He was told, Mashiach comes, he's going to come. It's a teisvis. That teisvis says, it's a Gemara, it's a teisvis, that Mesha v'Aaron Moshe yiyu imoim, and then there'll be Makayim mitzvahs gashmias, Beit Yisrael la gashmias. Kum tochois hazoi. That Levi, in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, had a huge chesed. Yeah. They were chelke v'gerole shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but in order to be chelke v'gerole shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there couldn't be the mamish. It could only be the geidel. There could only be the high end, not the low end, because they were a contradiction. La'asad Lovei, there's no contradiction between the geidel and the mamish, and Levi gets a chelek ba'aretz because he wants to do mitzvahs, ma'asis in Eretz Yisrael, like it says, b'negeh to Moshe Rabbeinu. And the same is true when you talk about the division of Eretz Yisrael b'chlal. That in historic times the division was through a goydel, which is separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei, and therefore if you were involved in Gashmis, you couldn't be Shevet Levi. If you were Shevet Levi, you couldn't be involved in Gashmis. La'asad Lovei is going to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'yatzmei, so there's going to be no contradiction between the goydel and the mamish, and even Shevet Levi is going to have a physical piece in Eretz Yisrael. And he continues, just like Moshe Rabbeinu is going to have a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. Al Piyam before Betanya, it says in Tanya, Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama exists in a spark in every single Jew. Right? What does the Gemara say? In the Gabi Moshe Milsa Zutresehi, to Moshe Rabbeinu it's an easy matter. Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, if it's easy for Moshe Rabbeinu, it doesn't make it easy for me and you. And Alter Rebbe answers, we all have a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu inside of ourselves. And therefore, Mitzad, I'm 8 lines from the bottom of the page. Mitzad Bechinas Moshe Benafshe. Because each one of us has a point of Moshe Rabbeinu and a neshama. The madregas of Moshe's Aveda become ours. How they move on the Ili Bezel, we understand the Maile. Every Jew has Chelik B'Eretz Yisrael Agashmis and the piece of physical Eretz Yisrael. Even Shevet Levi. Because there's no contradiction between the Gedel and the Mamish. Historically, there was a contradiction between the Gedel and the Mamish. And La'asad Lovei, there's not going to be a contradiction between the Gedel and the Mamish. And the Rebbe says, like it says in Tanya, that you need to have the goof of the Neshbabas to make Elokus come into this world, and so forth and so on. And he brings the famous idea of La'asad Lovei, Hanisham is Eines Min HaGuf. Now, I'm going to ask you a blunt question. Did you understand? We learned the Maimed. I went a little bit quick. I'm not going to debate it. We learned a little bit fast. But we learned the whole Maimed. I'm going to finish. If you're good, I'm going to read the last few lines. I just want you to sort of say, B'Klalos, I got it. Huh? The Pasuk says that historically Eretz Yisrael is divided up. It's through a Gedel Oretz. That first of all you have a Gedel, then it says in Chazal you have Nimshach Gabu'urim V'Tumim, and then it comes into Kesef. That was the way it was on the first time. Gedel Urim V'Tumim. Kesef, right? And the Rebbe says, Sha'adays and as Eretz Yisrael, then Eretz Yisrael became Nachlas Selim, an eternal inheritance. Obo Begelin, it is revealed, Mashanifak Fabavrias Bein Absarim, it brought out actually the covenant that the Eibush made with Avraham Avinu ben Absarim, which is Bris Eilam, an eternal covenant to every single Jew, Ulchol b'nei Yisrael, to all Jews. Ad save Kaladeda, says the Rebbe Hine. That Chalukah, which started off in Goydel and it came down to Tumim and came down into Dama, it's Hakeyach, Hachona, Vahakeli, it's the strength and preparation of the vessel. The Chalukah, Shadil Mabo, which is going to happen again when Mashiach comes. Because on the one hand, it's Be'ef and Shagadosh Baruch Hu Mechalak Ba'atzmei, Hashem divides himself. Because there's no stira between Yochid and there's no Helen between Yochid and Yechida. It comes down into the Goydel, and from the Goydel it comes down into Unavitumim, and from the Unavitumim it comes down into Domim. I skipped a few words. Every Yid gets a piece of each. In Had, in Shvela, in Emek. And it's not either or, it's everything. Because of Mamish, which is actually when the prophecy is realized, when Yidden left Mitzrayim, similarly, Lasso is going to be a Gula Shlemo, but Eifat Shem Yadein Golem Kolachat Mi Salachab Bnei Yisrael Kol God Lishu Vuhena, but Bias Mashiach Tzedkenu Yavav Yigalenu Lechem Mitzatenu. And now, of course, the Rebbe's lashon is take off from a Yad Mamish. Okay, now I hope I taught you the Maamar correctly. Maybe I read a little bit too much into this Goydel Mamish, but the Teichen of the Maamar is clear, right? That there was a Goydel and there will be a Goydel, but the Goydel Yasad Lavi is not covering over the HaKadosh Baruch Hu Beyatzmei. And that's why it becomes a Maila and not a Chasar.